Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Power Story. This is Veterans in Conversation with Barry and myself, Scott. This is our second of three podcasts so far. It's a new podcast, but we hope that it's going to be something that's very impactful for people who served in the military, folks who served as first responders, and folks who have transitioned from service. So today we have with us Drew Doolin. Drew is a friend of mine. I'll say that up front. He's a retired Marine colonel. We served together back in the mid 90s, back in around 95 to 96 at the Expeditionary Warfare Training Group Atlantic in Norfolk, Virginia, when we were both young captains at the time. I was sharing with folks before we hit play here that Drew he's a few years senior to me, and he was always someone that I looked up to, someone I can trust. And I'm very thankful that he's here today to talk to us about the things we're going to talk about. And we'll get to that here in a minute. So thank you guys, that everyone that's here live, thanks for being here. I see that everyone's mics are muted, so that's good. What we're going to do is we're going to interview Drew, and then at the end, we're going to save questions for the end so we can get through, what we want to get through on the interview. It's going to develop here as we talk as well. And then at the end, if there's time, we're going to do a question and answer period. So if something comes up and you want to remember it, if you can write it down or whatever, that's good. But hold your thoughts till the end, and then we'll wind up going around and giving you the opportunity to do that. Now we're going to keep the question and answer recorded, right? But if you want to ask a question or something comes up and you don't want to record it, just let us know, and we can pause the recording. We can talk, answer questions, and then we can go back to recording. And the reason I want to do this is because I think there's a lot of goodness that's in the question and answer period. So that's something that we want folks to see. And again, if you're not comfortable with that, we can stop recording so that you can get your time and have questions answered if you have something you want to say. And that's kind of the veterans in conversation, right? That's part of what this is about. So, okay, well, let me do this real quick. I'm going to go and bring up Drew's bio. I'm going to read this real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Drew just to give us a quick background on himself, as I had mentioned. So here we go. Drew Doolin is currently an executive partner with Gartner Executive Programs for the federal government sector. Drew brings more than 38 years of experience to his current role at Gartner through a diverse background of senior leadership, logistics operations, international security operations, management consulting, and IT solutions delivery for the Department of Homeland Security. He has led organizations as small as 40 to as large as 2,500 during times of crisis, and has served in some of the most high-profile positions in the federal government, to include his role as the U.S. representative to NATO for crisis management exercise planning, and as the military aide to the Vice President of the United States. Prior to joining Gartner, he served as the Agile Delivery Manager for ECS Federal supporting the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, in strategic planning, solutions development, and mission execution support across a diverse portfolio of cybersecurity programs. As an executive partner, he leverages his subject matter expertise to create innovative solutions to assist members in achieving their most mission-critical priorities. Drew's professional background, as I mentioned earlier, United States Marine Corps colonel. He served for 30 years. He has a bachelor's degree from Illinois State University, a master's of military studies from Marine Corps University in Quantico, hoorah. Federal Executive Research Fellow for the Brookings Institute, Washington, D.C. I mentioned he's a smart guy. Well, that kind of shows that as well. He's also a published author, Healing Hidden Wounds, The Mental Health Crisis of America's Veterans, Joint Force Quarterly, issue 54, third quarter 2009, which I read. That's a great, I'm going to actually, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to read a little bit from that here in a few minutes. And then also The Ultimate Micromanager in the Proceedings back in June. Was that 1990 something? I don't recall, but anyhow,
95, I think.
95. Okay. Hey, thanks, Drew. So let me go back to my screen here. Okay. All right, Drew. Well, with that fantastic bio, I just want to hand it over to you for a few minutes. If you can just, share with us, who's Drew Doolin and what are some of the important things that you want folks to know before we get into the interview here?
Oh, well, thanks, Scott. I look back on the time that we had together as really great. That was a great assignment. Really enjoyed it very much. As you mentioned, we were young captains then, leaner, had more hair, a lot more years ahead of me than behind me at that point. As you mentioned, I went to Illinois State University. I'm from a really small town in Illinois. I don't know. I think my brother's on the call. He correct me. It's probably it was like 2,600 people when we grew up there. Um, I had there's four of us, my two brothers and a sister. Myself, I'm the youngest of four. Um, B student in high school. Um, not really after the scholarly things in those days. Much more interested in sports and the arts and things like that. But I found opportunity after my college years in the Marine Corps, which I was going to stay in for 3 years. I turned into 30. Um, but along the way, I met my wife very early. I was probably 2 months commissioned as a lieutenant when I met her. She was the daughter of an Army colonel, so she had a good perspective of military life herself as a child, which was really fundamental to my success of the next 30 years, where we traveled around the globe and lived internationally as people do, and we raised, four great kids who are all very successful and now adults and grown on their own. Oldest daughter is a nurse. My son's a Marine and now a firefighter. My third child was a school teacher and is now a team leader for a pharmaceutical firm. And our youngest daughter is a Marine herself right now, stationed in Okinawa, Japan, as a platoon commander. So that's kind of who I am. The bio's great. I appreciate you reading it. It's reflected in here in my office. This is my comfort room or my I love me room, as my wife calls it. Um, but really, the more important things are the family we got to raise. Yesterday was no 2 days ago was our 37th wedding anniversary. I'm proud of that. Married to the same woman the whole time. We're proud of our kids and how close they are and how successful they've become. So I think that's really the most important thing. And the Marine Corps was a way to facilitate those things, which we really were looking to do in our lives when we met all those years ago.
Wow, that's 37 years is a long time to do anything, especially to stay married in these days, right? How many folks do you know that have been together that long? And my wife and I are, here's where I'm senior to you, Drew. We're 38 years,
Okay, well,
but
there you go.
so we're and everything that you said, I could absolutely apply that same thing to me. Whenever I was away, I never worried about my wife because I knew she was on top of it. Was very capable. I missed them, but I was never worried because I knew that she could handle whatever needed to be done. So yeah, we're blessed to have good wives
For
and
sure.
and kids as well. So well, thanks for that background, Drew. That's good to hear. And I had a feeling that you would probably say what you said. So let's do this. I'm going to go, and I'll have to open my phone because it just closed on me here. But what I want to do is I want to read the first half of, well, kind of the opener to the Healing Hidden Wounds Mental Health Crisis of America's Veterans that you wrote a number of years ago. I think it was 2009. And the reason I want to do that because I want to hop into when you transition, there's a lot going on, right? And you miss things. And there's things that happen to us when we serve that will wind up impacting us for the rest of our lives, whether it's something mental, something physical, something emotional, spiritual. There's a lot that happens when we serve. And there's a lot that happens as we transition and move forward in life. I like to say that we're always in transition, but there are some key transitions that we go through. And certainly When you walk away from 30 years of doing something that you absolutely love and are very good at, it comes with a lot of change and a lot of things that impact you that you might not really understand until you're in it. And I found that in being in the veteran space for a while, there are a lot more junior folks that want to talk about their experiences than there are senior folks. Maybe that's not completely true, but that's been my experience. And so that's really one of the reasons why I'm excited to have Drew here, who served 30 years and was a colonel and had some pretty significant jobs as a Marine, as a senior Marine as well. So, he'll be able to talk to us about things that senior officers go through and senior enlisted folks that are a little different than folks who are junior and aren't as invested as someone who's 30 years. Not that they're, not good folks, but when you stay 30 years, that becomes absolutely who you are. So we want to talk about that. And I want to start off, I'm just going to read here real quick uh, what Drew was capturing because I was in combat in 2003, and Drew is talking about his time as a battalion commander in combat. And I think it's very significant what he touched on because at that time, when we were in Afghanistan and in Iraq for a few years, a lot was going on back on the home front, and there was a lot of struggles, and we weren't sure maybe how to handle those things. It's gotten better, but I want to talk about that too. So let me do this. I'm gonna go ahead and read this here. So again, this is from Drew, and it's called Healing Hidden Wounds, the Mental Health Crisis of America's Veterans. From August of 2004 to January of 2005, and from January to September 2006, I commanded a Marine Corps logistics battalion of more than 1,100 Marines and sailors in Iraq, whose purpose was to provide support for a Marine infantry regiment in combat. My men and women drove more than 1 million miles through the worst of Iraq's bad guy country, Western Anbar province. And that absolutely was exactly that, bad guy country. During both deployments, battalion convoys were attacked with improvised explosive devices, IEDs, that resulted in loss of limbs, hearing damage, concussions, and other injuries. And on one occasion, members of the battalion were victims of a suicide vehicle borne IED that caused shattered limbs and permanent disfigurement from severe burns. Just as tragic, we lost Marines and sailors to vehicular accidents in the line of duty. Those absolutely happen. Even life in base camp was not free from danger, as we frequently received rocket fire from a nearby town. This was life in our area of operations during the height of the insurgency. After our return from the first deployment, I held roundtable discussions, and this is Drew. This is quintessential Drew. This is how involved he was as a leader. I held roundtable discussions with my Marines and sailors to talk about what we had seen, how each of us would characterize the deployment, and what it was like being home, and how those feelings manifested themselves. Many of the participants in these discussions commented that the operational tempo of the deployment was incredibly demanding, and they liked it. That's being a Marine, and it's being the sailors that are with Marines too. They're my commentary, and they liked it. That being back in garrison was slow, boring, and meaningless. That those who did not deploy with us just didn't get it, and that everyone missed those they served with. Although only a few admitted they had experienced symptoms of combat stress, for example, sleeplessness, anxiety, anger, and intrusive thoughts, most everyone's alcohol consumption had gone up exponentially, suggesting that there were some issues my Marines and sailors were not dealing with. After these informational discussions, I realized how much my battalion would have benefited from a formal combat operations stress control program that could have provided some training and education before deployment. An established program also would have given me some tools as a commander to assist my personnel through the transition from war back to normal life. During my time in battalion command, I was not aware of such a program existed, and wondered what was available to commanders in other services. With this in mind, as a federal executive fellow this past year at the Brookings Institute, I have researched what psychological wellness programs are available for today's commanders. I talked with other commanders, psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed counselors, chaplains, and returning war veterans to gain insight on the topic of effective stress control and returning to optimal emotional health following combat. I also reviewed program briefings from each of the service programs, interviewed people directly involved in these programs, surveyed service members who were about to deploy or had recently returned from a combat zone, and examined studies on combat stress. So I'm going to stop there. This is a great article. And what I'm going to do is once the recording is done, and then we go post the interview to YouTube and the other platforms that we will have this on, I'm going to include the link to this article and the other article that he's written, and then anything else that Drew wants to share with us, and we'll put that in the notes section for all those platforms that we use. So, Drew, a lot has happened since that time. I think what you did was a bit of a catalyst to open the aperture and to shine light in an area that there were significant shortfalls. Right? You don't know what you don't know, and a lot of times lessons learned get they collect dust on the shelves. Even lessons learned where it's done in blood, sweat, and tears. But this is a great article. So let's use that for a starting point. Can you just you know encapsulize or give us the short version on what this meant to you, what the effect was, and then what do you see now? What are the things that went forward and that you see good, and what are some things maybe that still need to be worked on and made better?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So that that was that article was part of a larger manuscript that I developed, and I use, as many authors do, you have a large manuscript and you scale it down to meet certain publications or certain speeches you do, and use that material as kind of the base set. And it was more clinical. The speech that goes along with that is much more emotional and more to my personal feelings about it, because that project at Brookings was the start of my personal healing from combat stress. It was a catalyst for me to get healed, to heal myself, and through discussions with other service members coming back from war. So the piece that was published is certainly clinical, and it's a comparative analysis of the programs that were resident in the services at the time. But more importantly for me, that it was an opportunity to start my own personal healing from combat. And it's emotional because at that time, not many senior officers were talking about combat stress. General Ham, if you recall, Army General, was one of the first very senior officers that talked about PTSD from his own perspective, and that was hugely important for me and for others at the time. It was kind of taboo. There was such a stigma, which is probably still there, frankly, to some degree, about admitting that you are suffering from combat stress or anxiety disorder, PTSD, or whatever terms you want to use. So that became at Brookings. When you're a fellow at Brookings, you're expected to publish. It's a publishing house of sorts for a think tank. And when I was asked my topic, I chose that because it was near and dear to me, and it took me on a journey that was really quite healing. I would say that admitting that you have had suffered some combat stress, my biggest concern about that when I was suffering from it in combat was that I would lose my command, that I would be sidelined and fired from my job. And so there was privilege with my psychiatrist that I was dealing with, who was a base psychiatrist at 29 Palms, California. He didn't share that information. I was going through my healing, and had I not come out the other side, I wouldn't have been able to deploy had I wanted to. I was incapacitated mentally, emotionally from combat scars. But my biggest concern, that was a concern for sure. My larger concern was that my kids wouldn't respect me anymore. That was the tough part. And so what was interesting, and I still find interesting, is the exact opposite thing happened. That when I told my kids it was a bonding experience, they didn't, they rallied around me. Couldn't have done any of that without my wife, who was central. We had little signals together when I was having anxiety attacks, and we had code words so that I didn't show the kids, and she could take a larger role at that moment because these attacks would happen in the strangest times and places. Uh, we had signals, hand and arm signals. She's a military spouse, so there was a hand and arm signal. There were cue words, and she would know and stand in front, do what she had to do, move the kids from one place to another, uh, grab my arm, whatever it took, right? So I had my own emotional support wife. Well, before I could have had a dog, but I had a wife, didn't need a dog. So that was the impetus behind the article that you read and the manuscript that was much more widely used. I used that as a keynote address in the Navy's program. They had a returning warrior weekend that was sponsored in the mid of 2009, 2010. And I was invited to speak at many of those, which it brought returning sailors back from war into a long weekend with their spouses to talk about everything from financial planning to psychological issues to marriage counseling. It was quite a comprehensive program, which I was really proud to be very small part in. Um, and the speech that goes along, basically, as I mentioned with that article, was the keynote. And I think it was really powerful for younger sailors and Marines to know that a senior guy, I was still on active duty, would actually talk about those things. One other thing, and then I'll stop for a minute to let you ask questions, but in those sessions that we did for returning warriors, we did a breakout session that I led called Why We Want to Go Back. And the spouses would attend that. And the first thing I would do is ask all attendees, how many of you want to go back to the war right now? It was raging at that time, it was still going. Every one of them wanted to go back. And their wives were aghast. Why would you, knowing how bad it was, why would you want to leave me and the kids and go back to that hellhole that was combat? And we tried to spend the most of that time in that breakout session helping the wives kind of come to grips with what the emotional draw would be to want to go back into a combat zone. And there's a lot to that, but I would just say it's the band of brothers thing. It's the sharing emotional hardships, physical hardships, psychological hardships in a bonding way that people have been writing books about since the Spartans. So anyway, that was the impetus for the article that you read.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. And the last thing you talked about was, trying to, provide some sanity to the spouses that were, hearing that, their husband or wife are ready to go right back on the front lines and do what they do as Marines and sailors. Our unit, we had that same thing. It's interesting when you read your comments in there about, hey, you come back into garrison, this is meaningless. What's happening and why we do what we do is back over there. And, they feel a bit of loss of sense of purpose, right? Which we feel once we transition from something, especially from service. So it's a very
Mhm.
similar thing there. In that they that they felt that folks that hadn't experienced that just didn't get us, just didn't understand. Now we fought a long war in Afghanistan for sure, and long enough in Iraq, and so folks got to experience that over time. So that kind of was less of an issue. But I mean, there were some folks that still didn't deploy, which that's interesting. But that happens too. Sometimes it's just where you are when.
Right.
But so what I was going to ask you, Drew, is how did that go with the spouses when that what was kind of the net effect of that? Was it kind of a mixed thing? Were they like, okay, at least I know better now, or you guys are still crazy, or maybe
Probably
it
a
was
little,
just a mixed review.
I think it's probably a little bit of all that. I think it probably was the first time that discussion in their marriage was really happening. One, because they had just come from combat, but even if they had multiple combat tours, which many did, um, they probably didn't talk about it. in that way, that freely in a public forum to describe, because I'd use a whiteboard and I'd write on the left side what all the bad things that you wouldn't want to go to combat because of, and all the good things. And all the bad things was a long list, and the wives get to put in there what they thought the bad things were,
Right.
missing no spouse there, missing holidays, birthdays, all of the things. And there weren't very many things on the right side of why you'd want to go back. Um, and they had a hard time squaring that. And yet the answer was still, yes, I acknowledge all the things on the left side, but I still want to go back to the things that are on the right side. It was probably the start of the discussion. I don't know that for everybody it was ever squared properly that they would get it. Um, but at least they started that discussion so that they could begin to understand the bond that happens there. And I think probably first responders have a similar kind of experience, that same heightened life and death thing that would be similar. But I think it started the discussion.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. When you think about the folks that are first responders, especially, police officers and sheriffs, and same with folks that are firefighters, right? They're facing that level of intensity any day, every day. Vice folks like us that and Barry that, were in combat and then you come back and then you go back into garrison and it's just different, right? Whenever I was driving to Camp Pendleton or wherever, I wasn't worried about engaging with the enemy. I had a lot of other things to worry about. But these folks that serve in that capacity, when they leave their home to go do their job, that could literally be their last day, especially the ones that are out, on the beat, that are, out there in harm's way. And the stress that must come with that I know that's got to be incredible. 'Cause, I
Well,
mean, it was stressful enough as a Marine. Yeah.
right, and there's a lot of stress on the families too. And for sure, my oldest daughter sang at the funeral of some of my Marines when I was still in combat. We were sending people, our Marines who'd been killed home, and so my daughter was there. My wife was there as the battalion's commander's wife. But as you mentioned about your wife, I talked to my wife once a week while I was in combat. I knew she had things locked down at home, but she dealt with a lot of things back in garrison as well. We lived on base, so everybody was deploying. That all of my kids' friends were dads were deploying and moms were deploying and all of that. So I think in that case there were many of the wives who did get it, but not everybody. We had reservists that were called up from their normal truck drivers or heavy equipment operators in Peoria, Illinois, and their wives didn't have to deal with. They did 2 weekends, a summer or 2 weeks in the summer and weekend once a weekend or whatever they did to drill, but that wasn't the same. And so for those kinds of folks that didn't have that same kind of lifelong experience, I'm sure that was the juxtaposition between being home and in combat was significant.
Oh, absolutely. And for those that might not, you know, understand this because they haven't served, when you're a battalion commander or a regimental, when you're the commander, there's a program, and if you're married, your wife gets to, take part in that program with the spouses that are back, here stateside. And there's a lot of work that comes with that, and that's part of, I think what Drew is speaking to here. Not only did she have the demands of, if she was working at the time, that plus being the mom and dad at home, and then dealing and working with issues that come up. And spouses have a lot of issues when their significant other isn't there. Some are financial, some are just dealing with problems. Missing their spouse. I mean, there's just a lot. So that's on the commander's wife, and then the group of other, wives and husbands that are part of that support team. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that folks might not even really understand.
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure.
so and so I see, I know Barry he's ready to get into this. So I want to be fair and open the floor up to Barry too. And so Barry, but before I do that, just as a reminder, I want to transition and to kind of get into uh, Drew's thoughts on his transition and some of the challenges that that he's dealt with and some things that he can share that, maybe helped him in various ways, whether it's, looking at, hey, what am I going to do when I get out? What jobs are out there, to some personal things, whatever you're comfortable with sharing, Drew. Uh,
Sure.
and what I'll do, Barry, is I'll put up the triangle that you built. That's kind of our foundation, so people can see that, and so that Drew can pick and choose what he wants to talk to on those challenges. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, brother.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Drew, you raised some really critical things, and I'd like to sort of throw some of it back on you for your understandings. The first one is what you called the Band of Brothers, and I think that's probably one of the most extraordinary, powerful things from which a lot of values come in, and I think civilian life can be a bit shortchanged. But I also see it as quite dangerously seductive because it really inhibits aspects of the transitional process and the sense that wives look at or the partners look at their veterans and know that they would rather be elsewhere. And it'd be interesting to see your thoughts on that one. The second one was that it's good to hear you talk about combat stress because I think people quickly jump too quickly into PTSD, and I do have a problem with the D at the end of the S.
Mhm.
But then what got me thinking probably after about 19 years of working with veterans and even reflecting back on my time at war was that when I think about the transitioning process, you can be anxious, your sleep is poor, your mood drops, you can start having panic attacks because you feel out of control, your fitness drops. Now, we all know that if you place people under significant transitional stress, and in my case, I often use the example of ultramarathons. At around 68 Ks, very similar things start to happen. So is there perhaps too much of a leap from transitional stress, which is complex, and I still don't think it's mapped out enough effectively, when people bring symptomatology to healthcare professionals, that they jump too quickly into combat stress or PTS or PTSD rather than normalize it within the complexities of transitional challenges?
That's a great question. I'll take your second question first. Um, while in those early years when I was writing about combat stress and studying combat stress programs and all of that, it was very much taboo. And this is just my perception, and it's probably unfair, but it's almost now cool to say that you have PTSD. It's become a thing where, um, I think it's everybody's now stressed out. Everybody's stressed so bad they have PTSD, and I think they've kind of maybe bastardized the combat stress. But that's not really for me to judge people's mental health. But it is, to your point, it seems everybody's stressed out, and they're not understanding this just normal stress, situational stress, life stress. Now, I think there's not much resiliency that I see in the younger generations now. That's just, again, a personal opinion. They seem to be, I mean, just looking at suicide rates, and those aren't just from people that have been to combat. Even in my own case with Marines that committed suicide a couple of times that I had that tragedy happen in my units, it was over breakups of a relationship. It wasn't about combat. So it's interesting to look at uh, relational stress, meaning stress in your day-to-day life, and how that's being coped with or not. Um, so that is an issue. On the first point that I mentioned about Band of Brothers and trying to describe what has been written books about for years and decades and damn near centuries about that bond. I don't know how to answer that other than to say I didn't want to shortchange the experience that I had that was natural, by the way. The kind of bond that grew was a natural, even if people you don't like. I mean, you don't have to like the people you're in combat with or serve with, as long as they're competent, right? Uh, and so you still had a bond with them that was unmatched in any other thing. Do I think that people hang on to that too much? Yes. I'll give you an example. And again, not being critical, I often see because people will come up to me and say, "Oh, were you in the Marine Corps?" And I'll say yes. And there are reunions for people that joined the Marine Corps and did one tour, not even in combat. They did a 4-year tour, and they go to a reunion every year for their recruit class that they went through boot camp with. That's how strong that experience was. Not, well, there's probably some stress in there too, but that bonding experience of going through Marine Corps recruit training and one tour is enough that they continually go back year after year in reunions to share that experience. That's how strong the culture building part, certainly for my service, Marine Corps, is and remains. So that's pretty tight. I don't see that leaving anywhere. If we're doing it right, we should be that bound to the thing. However, to your point, transitioning once it goes away, if you're that invested and you haven't found your personal values beyond what the uniform brings or those experiences, that's where we see real problems. We see a lot of drinking and even in senior folks, they're drowning their sorrows and their past. I was fortunate enough not to have that experience. I think one of the benefits from my transition out of the military was my last 2 years I was serving in an Army unit and in a suit and tie every day because of the mission that we had. I was the chief of staff for a three-star Army general who was wonderful, still remains a great friend. And I think being out of the military uniform and into a suit and tie was beneficial. I worked with a lot of contractors and civilians, so they outnumbered the military people on our staff. So I think that helped me for a couple of years. I was saying to Scott, had I retired the day I left my regiment, was my colonel command, if I was on the parade deck in front of all of the aircraft and all of my unit and retired that day, I think I would have fallen off the cliff. I wasn't ready for that emotional letdown that was going to happen when I got out of uniform and just became a civilian again. I think a former commandant of the Marine Corps, General Amos, who was an aviator, the only aviator commandant the Marine Corps had, you'll hear people say you're always once a Marine, always a Marine. I think that that was a nod to it's okay to still call yourself a Marine. You're just not in uniform anymore. And I think it seems trite and trifle, but let me tell you, it's important. I still say I'm a Marine. I'm ready to go. I don't know if I could. Dakota Meyer, Medal of Honor winner, just enlisted again yesterday. He's a stud and he can still pass all the physical fitness tests. I think it'd be a struggle for me at this point, but I still try to remain in shape, but I am an older guy now. But I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, look, I think what you point to, and maybe we could look at today, is also that I don't think it's about leaving parts of yourself behind. I think it's about the challenges, how you integrate who you were into who you are.
Mhm.
I think that whole philosophy of let it go, I think it's quite destructive because, as you pointed out, these are really core identities and belonging. And I think it really touches on the concept of tribe. And I don't think we should lose tribe, but it's about combining tribe with a new life, and how we merge the two. And I often say that when we combine the veteran with the civilian, we actually have an extraordinary human being. So I think there's that plus the fact that you point to, I don't think the map and the subtle layers, even not feeling good enough, was something I tracked over 22 years with a lot of the guys, and that includes myself as well. So there's things that jump up in the territory, and because they're unnamed, people don't know how to expect them, wait for them, or manage them. So it's a mixture of all of those in terms of making the transitional process actually a powerful and a healthy process in which you bring yourself forward rather than forget about who you were.
No, I think that's spot on. I totally agree with that, Barry. Um, I always said that I wasn't going to leave the Marine Corps bitter. For whatever people leave bitter. They didn't get the next promotion. They weren't selected to be a general officer. They didn't get the right commands. They whatever didn't get the right medals, whatever the case may be. I always promised myself that I wouldn't do that. It is certainly my brand. I mean, this is the office that I work in, my current job, and I'm not hiding from the brand. I'm embracing the brand, right? Because it would come out anyway. I mean, I am, I am what I am, as Popeye said. So it's going to come out. So I just embrace it. I would tell you that my resume today is wholly different than it was when I first got out of the Marine Corps. I'm an entirely I am not a reborn cat or a new cat, but I'm an enhanced cat with a lot more capabilities because I had to study and learn and network in a different way. And learn new skills. And one of the things I love about what I'm currently doing is I learn every day that I'm talking to folks that I work with. So it's a constant learning environment. And so in that learning over the past 8 years since I've retired from the Marine Corps, I'm a different person, a better, more fulfilled person, still bringing, as you say, Barry, I'm still the Marine with all of those experiences, but now more enhanced with the continued growth as a human, right? And a little, maybe a little softer, a little more gentle approach, maybe to things, and a much more fulfilled and happy person. So I don't shed the Marine Corps at all. I wear it proudly, but it was foundational to where I am now, and that's important. But I'm different than I was today, and I'll admit this too. It's probably good that I'm not in the Marine Corps anymore. Leave it to my daughter, who's now a platoon commander, doing her thing. I might still have some of the old think that is not what the Marine Corps needs today from me. Um, as much as I'd love to get back in there, I think I can still get in my uniform and do all that. But I'm bringing, I think it needs a new generation. It needs, or a refuel of the new kids and what they do. So it was the timing was right for me to go. I had to go by law. 30 years, so that's it, unless you become a general or you had prior enlisted service. And so it was my time to leave, and I embraced that. But for sure, as you can tell, I'm carrying it with me.
Thanks, Drew. Good lessons and good wisdom.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love your office. I'll admit I'm envious. But no, when you talked about your wife, your family, both your kids that served as Marines, and um, man, you were so blessed, Drew, to have that support that you have on the home front, right?
Oh
And the
yeah.
and the sheer fact that both of your kids followed in your footsteps to be a Marine uh, shows the impact that you had, not only as a dad, but as an American, as someone that they looked up to and said, "Wow, I want some of that too." That's meaningful, and just it makes me sad that there are folks that don't have that type of support at home, right? Either
Yeah.
because they're not married, or or they've got some issues and they're struggling. Uh, but I'll just echo what you said. My family support was tremendous, and it helped me be able to focus on the things that I needed to do as a Marine without being, without having to turn my and look over my shoulder constantly, worried about things that may or may not have been going on. And just, um, you know, my kids tell me how different I am now. They're like, "Oh my God, Dad, you're you're not the same guy you were as a Marine," and I take that in a good way because it is in a good way. I was focused on being a Marine, and that's what I did. And lessons from them. I learned things from my daughters. I'm a better guy because I have daughters, but they
Mhm.
helped soften up some of the rough edges that I had as a Marine. And I'm much more at ease in talking about the things that you've just talked about, things that are emotional,
Mm.
things that go back to who you are, and the things that are sometimes scary to talk to, or maybe you some folks feel like they're less of a person if they talk about their troubles or their emotions. And I think it's anything but that. I think it winds up healing us. I think it winds up um, letting other people see, wow, if a guy like Drew, the colonel, 30-year guy, if he had struggles with this, holy smokes. And boy, what did he do? How did he handle those things? And that's why talks like this are so important. So,
I
yeah,
think
so
what's interesting too, Scott, when you talk about you didn't have to look over your shoulder. From my perspective, it was a very selfish thing. I mean, I was so focused on my Marines, and to have a spouse that understood that in that moment she was coming second in my life. My 1,100 Marines were number one, right? And had to be, and she understood that I needed to be 100% focused to bring as many of them home alive as possible. And so that is a sacrifice on the other side that she had to make, knowing that I was going, no matter what, I was going to be there with my Marines. So having someone that can be that strong and be okay with that gave me the freedom to do what I needed to do. And so I attribute, all, if not all, that's certainly a significant portion of my success over the years is because of that. And to check that ego of mine, when I was transitioning to look for civilian work, I had three potential offers on the table in private industry, and they were all pretty high paying positions. They would require me to move from Virginia, where we were living at the time. And my youngest daughter, who's currently Marine in Okinawa, was in high school. And so we had the dinner talk. It was just my wife and I were at the dinner point at the table at this point, talking about these jobs. And I was lamenting, I like this one because it was going to have me move back to Illinois. And this one was in Portland, Oregon. And she said, well, you'd have to have a crash pad because I'm not going to Illinois and I'm not going to Portland and we're not moving. I said, yeah, you have to come home on long weekend. She was going through in her mind what this would look like. And she said to me words to something to this effect. She said, let me just ask you, is this big job about your ego or is it about us as a family? Wow. That one hit me right in the head. She's like, I'm good with either of them if you want to do that, but just know that, do you need this big job because you're not a general? Wow, that was in your face, right? As a wife can do,
Appropriate. Yeah.
appropriate. And I was like, oh man, that's yeah, maybe I'm still chasing this self gratification that the success that I had and all those things. And um, a blessing happened to us. I didn't get offered any of those jobs. So I didn't have to make that choice, but I think that I know what my answer would have been anyway. But was taken off the table when none of those positions actually materialized into an offer. So, but it was a moment to sit back and realize that maybe I was chasing the ego parts of this, of what that career can look like.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like she probably wears the expert rifleman badge because
Yeah,
she had you right in
yeah,
the center there.
yeah. It
Yeah,
was a
but
good shot. Yeah.
yeah, I'll tell you, my wife is she's held me accountable as well, and it's interesting how many times I go back now and think of the times where I was so focused that I mean things happened that I wasn't even aware of,
Oh, yeah.
and that she didn't tell me until some other point when she thought it was probably you know okay, now's the time to tell you about this because it would have potentially distracted me from what I was doing, as a Marine or, as a commander. But yeah, just the weight that our spouses carry and the ones that do it so well, need to write books so they can share that information.
Right.
Uh, I mean, it's a national security issue.
Oh
I mean, if
yeah.
you
I'll
really want to
tell
think
you
about that.
a quick little funny vignette that happened. I was coming home from one of my deployments. I can't remember which one, first or second to Iraq. And on the parade deck, we pulled up in the buses and all of that, and there's band playing and balloons, et cetera, et cetera. And I got into our vehicle and we drove we lived on base, so it was a real quick ride. And my 5-year-old, now the Marine, she said, Dad, doesn't the truck look good since Mom had it fixed? And my wife went, oops. She got in a crash with her vehicle and didn't tell me she had just got it repaired before I got back. She'd been driving around beat up. And I just cracked up because there's an example of she's taking care of things that she doesn't want to bother me when I'm trying to lead Marines in combat, over something like a fender bender that could be handled at the auto body shop.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Again, blessed. Absolutely. So, what I want to do now is I want to bring up the diagram that I referenced earlier. It's the triangle that's kind of foundational for what we want to do here on this program moving forward. So, Barry, I'm going to go ahead and bring that up, and then I'm going to let Barry kind of lead this part of the conversation, if you could, Barry. And Drew, if you once we bring that up, if you can look at that
Hmm.
and you don't have to talk to every item on there, but if you want to, that's fine. But if you can select a few on there that the challenges that, wind up coming into our, inner circle when we're trying to figure things out in life, those
Sure.
stresses and things. If you can talk to that, and I'm going to let Barry lead that part of the conversation. So let me
Okay.
share my screen. Okay, can you guys, is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, great. Here we go, Barry.
Thanks, Scott. Drew, in fact, there's another arrow you just brought into mind, which is effective navigation into the family home, back into the family home.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
that's a
because
rough.
you know you're the partner, whether it's a male or a female, becomes the CO of that territory,
Mhm.
and in fact they run the show, and they've learned to hold on to certain parameters at work. So they've
Mhm.
got all their SOPs, and then we come back and decide to change everything. So I
Yeah,
think that's probably another error I'd put in there.
yeah,
But
that's
the thing that we came up with was with the concept of the core things that are the protective factors are faith, wellness, and tribe. And as you can see from the arrows, there's a number of issues. And I suppose what I just talked about now would fit into relationships, is how we navigate back into our relationships. But when you're looking at that, what are the core challenges that you think you were facing? You've raised a couple here, but what comes up for you?
yeah. I think that the faith bubble at the top is key. It's timely, obviously, in Easter weekend. I don't know how you get through some of the demands of combat without having faith. I really feel bad for people that don't have a grounding faith because there are times there's nothing else to reach back to. So you're totally stripped of everything in some of these times, and without faith, I don't know how they whatever religion, whatever practice, but to have something to fall back on, I don't know how that would have happened. It certainly would have been terrible for me. And I was reading books in combat. There's one called Purpose Driven Life that I've read. I've got that dog-eared so many times. It's a Rick Warren book. It's 40-day journey about your purpose in life. That brought me through a lot. I've got it dog-eared and labeled and read it many times. It's very good. So faith is really key, at least it was for me. Um, yeah, all of these are I like all of them because I've dealt with all of those for sure. Everything from the imposter syndrome, which you have down in the lower part of that triangle, where um, I think we all experience a little bit of imposter syndrome in life. You get a promotion and you don't think you can actually do that job, and so there's a little bit of that apprehension and maybe something that we call imposter syndrome because you have to act like you are in that role when you really don't understand the role. Some of that's true in military life, especially if you do a long career because you're constantly moving, and if you're successful, you are given more responsibility in a higher position. So it's a risk gain thing. It's also high risk and high reward. So I think that's something we all deal with, not just coming out of combat. Um, but when you transition from the military role to the civilian sector, for example, like I did, even as a senior guy coming out and trying to go into the corporate world, they don't understand what you did in the military or its value, and they don't see you as an executive, and that's hard for senior folks getting out. My last command was a regimental command of 2,500 folks. Um, and then I'm going to try to get a civilian job, and they want me to start all over again in some lower level, if management at all. And that's a real blow to your expectation and to your ego as well, is um, coming from the kinds of responsibilities you have. Think about it. As a lieutenant, my daughter has 50 Marines under her, multiple millions of dollars worth of equipment. She's going on a Navy ship for a deployment at sea. She's responsible for training them, for disciplining them, for motivating them. Not many jobs right out of college give you that kind of exposure and experience. So even for her, if she were to get out soon, she will find a big deficit, a big drop in responsibility from what she's already been offered the opportunity to excel at in the Marine Corps. So you imagine that times 30 years, leading and doing the kinds of things you get to do at senior level, and then trying to equate to a job where, you might be the assistant manager at the local Amazon warehouse. It's hard to make square that in your head. that's something we don't do a great job of explaining to folks when they get out what their expectations really should be, um, of what they really might be able to do, what kind of jobs they really might be able to do, and how much it's going to pay, and what kind of responsibilities and how many people they're going to lead. That's an interesting one. Um,
And just to jump in there, Drew, what are your thoughts around helping people to navigate through that? Because it's almost like you go back to boot camp in civilian life, and I've seen numbers of special force guys who are working on the roads. And the thing is, how do we manage that experience without it eroding who we are? And then we're going back into whatever trauma, the challenges, combat stress, because it can throw you back into that. So, how do we prepare people for the fact that you may be less than ordinary?
well, I don't think we do it very well. I went through a transition program that the Marine Corps had, which I thought was useless. Because it wasn't really geared towards senior folks. I know other services have a similar program, but I mentor a lot of folks still today that are transitioning, and I was mentored by some great mentors when I was transitioning, which was the most important thing, not a canned class on what this is going to be like, and it was really important to me. So to have I've talked to many people. I did it. My transition was about a year and a half of me working with people like that to help me make that transition. And I would say that's almost not enough time. I would recommend 2 years as you're getting close to retirement or transition to start working with other people who've gone through that so they can help you understand what it's really going to look like and not some canned program that helps you with your resume. I mean, that's a part of it that you got to do, but that's the least of your worries is what the resume looks like. So I don't think we do a great job at that. So it really relies on those of us who are still, in the community to help folks get it. There is a great program called American Corporate Partners that it's a 501c that matches military folks transitioning out with executives in the corporate world. And that was pretty helpful. They matched me with a very senior guy at Caterpillar in Illinois, who was a great mentor for me, former submariner in the Navy, senior officer, and now a very successful logistics guy in the corporate world. He was helpful. But other than that program, I didn't really have. It was all based on communication with my network and expanding my network. That was really helpful as I looked at what it was going to be like on the other side. And even at that, though, the transition it's individual to everybody. You got to live through all this. You got to live through the pain of the transition. You got to find out what you really want to do, or what I wanted to do was not something I could do because I couldn't afford. I wanted to teach high school, and there was no way I could live at the standard we used to live on a high school teacher's salary. And so I couldn't do what I really could have, but it would have been a great sacrifice on everyone. So I did something that was different than that to be able to meet other criteria for what we thought were important. But that's part of the challenge. You got to go through all those machinations. What do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? What don't you want to do? What's available for you to do? And then hopefully it all comes together at the end that you can make it work and be happy enough. It's not the Marine Corps. It's not the Army. That's why I wanted to stay as long as I could. A wise man told me, a friend of mine said, don't get out until they make you get out because you're never going to be able to do this kind of a job again. And that was true. So I stayed a long time, even though some said it was financially not a great decision to make, but it was emotionally the right thing to do.
So it's
So
almost that rebirthing process, isn't it,
Mhm.
Drew? And I mean, that rebirthing process, I know like there's also the Honor Foundation that transitioned into corporate stuff. But the
Mhm.
thing is, there's still the person, the core of who we are that, yes, you can get a great job, but who you were, if we don't deal with that, you take that into your job. And I think we need those two factors, the internal factor and the skill-based factor working together. But it's very tricky. It's really challenging. And I don't think we're doing it that well. And the evidence for that is the number of people that are deciding to end their lives every day.
We're not doing it well. I think the other part of it is too that you have to impress upon the military folks what it's not going to be like out there, and they're going to have to change their language, the way they talk, the way they speak, the terms they use, the way they approach things there. Particularly in the Marine Corps, right? We're pretty aggressive personalities in the Marine Corps, and I think that can be read, as way too much, way too overbearing, way too in your face. too black and white on issues, and we have to stress that because the corporate world doesn't work the same way, and that is a tough transition. But I'll tell you, if you get it right, I use my military stuff all the time. I rename it. I'm doing simple things like a 5-paragraph order for those who've been in uniform and know what that is. I rebrand a 5-paragraph order on my strategy development that I'm helping C-suite executives understand how to build strategy for their organizations. It's right out of the manual. It's right out of the military manuals. It's just simply with a different twist and different syntax, different names for things, but the reality is the same in building strategy, whether it's in the military or corporate America at the C-suite. It's strategy at the end of the day.
And thanks, Drew. I mean, and Scott, also jump in as needed. Something that came to me many years ago, I was working with a sniper, and after a couple of sessions, there was a silence, and he said to me, "There's something I need to tell you that I've never said to anyone else." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "The one thing I miss the most is hunting humans." And I could see the shame wash over him. And my response to him was, I understand that 100%. And what's the tension between combining both and living with the fact that going to war is about hunting human beings, but yet we can be loving fathers and husbands and wives, and how we work that tension. And that is probably that was such an awakening for me, because I realized that's an edge that's not normally discussed.
Yeah, which falls to me under your category of moral injury as
Yeah.
well. I would say that if someone is feeling that urge, that maybe is probably not right. That needs some psychological help, wanting to hunt humans. But to the degree of feeling guilty about it and the moral injury of the things you have to do in combat that are incongruous to our lives, particularly Americans, I would say, and other developed nations, obviously. But to go from a small town in Illinois, really great place to grow up and safe, to Western Al-Anbar province, and seeing the things you see and the kind of actions that humans do to other humans there is so hard to get square in your head.
Yeah.
And the things that you have to do in a combat environment while trained to do them and certainly justified to do them because of the nature of combat, the graphic nature of what you're doing still can provide a moral injury that's something that people struggle with and have post-traumatic stress over, nightmares over, because of the gruesome nature of what combat really is. So that's, if I haven't heard that personally, I touched on wanting to go back. I'm sure there's some of that maybe is more like what akin to what you had, but that disturbs me. That if someone said that to me, that would disturb me. I have, and I know you understand my position on that. I certainly have no interest in hunting humans.
Mm.
I have an interest to defend Americans and my fellow Marines and sailors to my left and right, my family, and all of that. But I don't understand the psychological aspect of wanting to hunt humans.
I tended to see it after when I started thinking about it. I understood it as the tension between the band of brothers and the tribe and the mission at war, and that there's a certain seduction in that whole experience that I think people struggle with when they do get into civilian life. So, I mean, certainly what I've seen in Australia is a lot of the veterans will often go out shooting on farms. But I think there's a tension, and I think you nailed that really well, is that tension between the seductive element of everything we're surrounded by. And I don't mean seduction in a bad way. I mean, it's that sense of truly belonging, identifying with trusting people, shared values, and having a purpose and a mission, which is, I think, something we all want in our lives in whatever form it is. But how we transition that effectively and adjust and adapt it into a new way of living.
I agree with that.
Yeah, Barry, I mean, this is a great part of the conversation. And I think what I'm going to ask here kind of segues into that. Drew, you mentioned a bit about faith initially, about how important that is to you. And that's why it's at the top of our pyramid there. It makes sense. We talked a bit about, some wellness things. Uh, Barry, you guys were just kind of talking about tribe, right? And so tribe is something that changes too, because when you leave service, you're leaving your tribe. And there's all kinds of good intent to want to stay connected with those folks. But, you know, they move on. The folks that stay in the military, they certainly move on because they've got to turn around and go back to mission, or they're moving on a permanent change of station orders. They're going somewhere else. But, you're outside the gate now, when you transition. And so what does tribe mean then? What advice, Drew, can you give for folks that are challenging with that tribe, because it kind of goes into maybe loss of belonging, loss of a sense of purpose. Uh, how did you handle that tribe? Did you maintain it? Did you rebuild it? Did you add to it? What was your experience there?
That's a great question. I think I still maintain connections with folks that I serve with and military folks that I don't serve with. I still have that as foundation. But I would say this. Um, what are the elements of tribe that are so important that we want to be part of it? And when you find those things, you can find those in other people who didn't even serve in the military. My friend group now here, we moved to Florida 4 years ago, and my getting, on the way to retirement, we downsized and came to Florida. And the friend group that I hang around with, none of them are former military. But what they have are the essential elements of the people that I want to be around. They're successful people, they're faithful people, they're good family people, they're strong men, they're leaders in their families, in their community, they're energetic and upbeat and positive, and so all of those things I just said are part of my tribe then and are part of my tribe now. And so I have not shed any of my old tribe. They're still there, but the tribe, you bring in new new people with the same kind of beliefs and moral values and continue to build your tribe that way. I'm the only military guy in the current tribe down here.
Yeah, that I absolutely agree with that. And when I look at my tribe where I live in Southern California, uh, that's essentially the same. I've got one friend out in my group of folks that I'm spending time with here locally. One of those guys, he was an enlisted guy in the Air Force, Stephen Strait, phenomenal guy. He was a crash fire rescue, and then he went into the firefighting service for a whole career. And he's just salt of the earth, good guy. But yeah, outside of that, but the same principles, those same things that you feel are important, you look for those folks. And something I
Mhm.
try to share with people that are who are transitioning from military service or even uh, folks that are first responders is look for folks who served as well, right? Because you have that same background, folks who served, they understand service. And so even though your friends that you're closest with may be going on and doing other things and you may relocate, so you're kind of in a new area, I always tell folks to search out veterans because they've transitioned. And most of them, maybe it's a little tough in the beginning, but they get it and then they move on in life, right? So those are folks that you have empathy with. Those are folks that you can get stories. What are the things that you did that were help aid you in your transition? So I always try to uh, make sure that folks don't forget that, because that could be, and not everyone who transitions from the military is going to be the best person to talk with. That's life, right? There's 10% everywhere, but I think, there's a path there that's, been paved a bit, and there's some wisdom there that we can find in those people. So I always try to get
I,
folks to remember that, not
I
to
agree.
just
I
throw
agree
that
with that.
aside.
Yeah, I agree with that, particularly when you first are transitioning. I think over the years, now that I've been out of the Marine Corps for 8 years, it I need less of that now
Right.
because to the points I made earlier about I'm a different person now. I've developed into other things and other interests. I need less of that connection than I did early on. Um, but I think at the point of transition, and as Barry and I were saying, as you're planning for that transition, I would say that those are the folks you most definitely lean on because even outside folks that want to help you with your transition don't get it as much. So um, early on, as you're transitioning and the early part of your transition, for sure, that's a great thing. It could be that later as you grow, you need less of that contact.
That's a really good point. I've
Absolutely.
I've actually not heard it put so well. And I mean, I think there's a lot of profound wisdom in that I think initially the concept of tribe, as in the military tribe, is critical for the transition process and a sense of belonging and identity. But you raised something, it's the first time I've heard somebody actually raise that, that we have to be willing to find the attributes and values in others that are not necessarily from the military tribe. And I think what that brought to me was, the Rhodesian Bush War, one, we lost it. Two, they removed our passports, removed our citizenship, our country changed name. And I can see how so many of my generation now, who in their mid 70s, are almost institutionalized into who they were. Some of whom are still contracting in their 80s in different forms, but quite institutionalized. And I think there's a real risk, potentially from what you've noted, of if we don't find common attributes and values in others that don't necessarily come from our tribe, there could be some interesting journeys within that.
It's a great point. And Scott and I had this conversation a few days ago. Is you from what I've seen or what I saw during my transition and how I coach people now, that there's seems to be something around 5 different avenues you can take as a senior officer. You can go right back into government service, which right now, and this what's happening since the new administration, it's not many openings. They're downsizing, early retirements, maybe even a reduction in force. So your opportunity to go back to be a government employee is very, very restricted right now. One, they're on a hiring freeze, so you can't do it. There's that avenue. There's the avenue of starting your own business, maybe not related to the government, but that's very risky. And unless you have a great idea, 70 to 90% of small businesses fail. So that's a tough avenue to go through. You could go home and take over your dad's farm or your dad's industrial glass company or his car dealership. That's great. You don't need to network for that. You got that, and that good on you if that's something you can do. You can be a government contractor, and that's not great right now. We're getting government contractors being schwacked constantly, right? They're being doged out of work. So I think the transition, when I've seen peers of mine who went right back into the same position they were in uniform, and they converted it from a military position to a government employee, they're happy with it. And at that time, they were doing it for security. I don't think there's a lot of security in that now, but they were doing it for it's a secure job. And you're never going to get fired. Doesn't take a rocket scientist, or maybe it does, to make that happen. Um, but I don't know that they've had the same kind of experience. That I think my experience is fuller because I branched out in a different ways. So, I mean, to each his own. But I think I'm glad I didn't do that when I was getting out.
Drew, as you reflect where you are now, are you still, are there still gaps in how you are transitioning, remnants of things left behind inside you that kind of whisper to you that you still have to pay attention to?
Not too many. Not too many, I'm happy to say.
Good. Yeah.
No, I'm do I still think about my military experiences? And definitely, I have that. I have a tie into the Marine Corps because of my daughter currently serving, which is nice, and I can still mentor her. She's getting some colonel level mentorship every morning on a phone call when she calls me from Japan. So that's a good thing. And I told Scott the other day we were chatting. I I didn't stay connected to the Marine Corps when I got out until my kids became Marines. And then now I'll just ask them questions. Like, what handgun are you using now? Oh, you got a new pistol. What kind of, I had to ask my daughter the other day, what kind of truck is your main truck? Because we had this particular truck. They have new equipment. So I've been able to keep up somewhat, but no, I don't have any regrets that I lose sleep over or any part of me that's hasn't been addressed yet. But I would be lying if I said that I still don't have moments where still dealing with PTS and some of those to some degree. I'm not waking up in night sweats and all of those earlier things that happened, but I've healed greatly from that. But it's still part of my journey and where I've come from, and it is who I am. But I no, I'm pretty well adjusted, thankfully, at this point.
Okay, I mean that's a remarkable journey. What's your what are the protective factors that you use constantly to work with the remnants of the combat stress or the PTS factors?
Well, one of the good things is when if you suffer from anxiety disorder or combat stress, um, and you embrace knowing that that's there. I know when it's coming on. I know what it is. I've identified it. I know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and there's some comfort in that. You learn tips and tricks on how to address it when it comes back. So, as I told you earlier, in the early days of coming out of the war, my wife and I had hand and arm signals, and we still have little terms I'll use. I'll say, and one of my favorite is I'm changing the venue, which means I have to leave where I'm at right now. I can't be in this physical space right now, whatever that space is. It's like, hey, I need to change the venue. I need to physically move to somewhere else. So that happens. But we all know about it in my family. It's not debilitating. It's just who I am today. It doesn't happen all the time. So you learn to cope and you learn coping mechanisms. You learn tricks. Um, you learn to live with it, to know that what it is and identify it and not shy away from it. Or um, I don't know that I always understand what triggers are the triggers to these things, but I understand how I react to them. And so I think we've learned to adjust to that.
Well, I think a key thing you've pointed out is that I think a lot of veterans that I see are really poor, shortchanged on the communication factor with their wives and their families. And I think the fact that you've actually communicated your internal space to the family and you've got protocols around that is a massive protective factor. And I think that's a massive lesson for folk returning to their families is not to encapsulate and just contain it inside, because the wives or the partners, they track it really quickly. And if we keep denying it, it's this gap that grows between us and them. And the greater the gap, the more at risk everybody becomes.
Yeah, I think it's important because she also knows it's not her,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
I'm in a mood for whatever reason. And if I say, oh, I'm fine, it's nothing. Well, she may instinctively think it's something that she did or that I'm upset with
Yeah.
her. And by using I'll just say, no, I'm having a moment here. She knows what that is, and it's not about her. Because if it is her, I tell her, it's you. So I say that kiddingly, she's in the other room, so I hear me. But no, I think it's hugely important that
Yeah.
I've been able to share that.
I know one of the things that I found often very useful with the guys is that we go back to operational stuff, which is cleaning the weapon, and we look at the concept of pull-throughs. And no pull-through, you're going to get a stoppage, an AD or an ND, whatever you call it, or a runaway gun. And then when the guys leave, and I mean, I've maintained this most of my life, is what are my 15 or 20-minute pull-throughs every day, because life has a residue. And I find that whether it's making your bed, the McCraven type approach is just make your bed. Those pull throughs are so critical. And I often say what they do is they take you from the back seat to the front seat. You're still driving through a sandstorm, but you're in the front seat.
No, that's
And
right.
and I, and the guys often neglect. They put on weight, they drink too much, and then it's a slippery slide because the older you get, as you know, the harder it is to come back out of that.
Yeah. No, no, you're right. That's spot on. I love the McCraven analogy. Always make your bed in the morning. And
Yep.
those apply to people who have in everyday life, I think, the basics, the things you go
Yeah.
through.
It's a
Uh,
life skill,
yeah. And it's
Drew, and I
just,
mean that's what you're teaching people are life skills.
yeah, for sure.
Well, real quick, I just want to do a time hack check with folks here. We've been at this just a little more, the recorded part of, just over an hour now. So, Drew, are you good for staying on for a few more minutes for
Yeah.
a Q&A,
Uh,
or do you have to
yeah,
push?
let's do 5 or 6 minutes of Q&A. I have another engagement this evening that I have to go to, but
Okay.
happy to take any questions that anybody, but Janet might have, or Lisa, anybody.
Okay, great. So, if you have a question, if you can just raise your hand, on the reaction, or if you can just if you can't find it on your phone, you raise your hand. You've got a question for Drew, or for Barry or me, or whatever, or just a comment. So it looks like Janet was first at hand here. Janet, what you got?
Hang on,
Yeah, I
Scott,
just want to say,
can you take the picture off?
Oh, yeah. Hey, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks. Perfect.
there we go. Yep. Okay.
Janet.
Janet, is
Janet,
that
can you
over
hear
to
me?
you?
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Drew, for that, and thanks for putting in the link to the article, and yeah, and great that you're here, Ryan, supporting your dad. But anyways, thanks. I
Yeah,
love these guys, Barry and Scott, and
well,
of
that's
course
great.
Sarah's our mama bear. So
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, I still have a lot to learn, so I try to chime in whenever I can.
So Ryan, what can you share about your dad?
Oh, well, I feel like that's a loaded question. Well, maybe we need to get a little bit more specific. He's been my role model my entire life. He never forced us, my sister and I, to join the Marine Corps. He never even suggested it. We came to him with that proposition. Um, I think it was just his example that he set that led me to want to follow in his footsteps, if you will. In first grade, we lived on base in Quantico, and there was a demonstration where the Marine Corps war fighting dogs were doing a demonstration on the football field where they were, taking down their handler. And I was like, I want to do that. And he said, you can do that, absolutely. But you should also consider being an officer. And I didn't know what that meant at that time. But as I grew up, I realized the roles and responsibility that is, you know, involved in being a Marine Corps officer. And if I wanted to be just like my dad, I needed to go the officer route. So he's my hero, he's my role model, and like I said, we have leadership conversations between my sister and I and him weekly, and I'm still picking up things here and there. So I'm very fortunate to have such a mentor like him.
Drew, thanks, Ryan. And Drew, I really want to say you are an extraordinary and exemplary light for what veterans can look like as fathers and husbands and leading examples as they move into civilian life. Really, it's you've got this incredible balance, and I know it hasn't come easily, and I know that parts of you still struggle. But your son is testifies to the fact that you've done it really well, and I think that is such an example for all of us at any age as we move forward, trying to bring the best of ourselves when we are really struggling at times. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a team sport. They've seen me at my worst. It's not all, Instagram, right? It's not all pretty. I don't, I don't, I don't do everything correctly. I make a lot of mistakes still. Um, it's just part of it. But we talk about tribe. I have a little tribe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Got your fire team there.
yeah,
yep.
Yeah, and that's life, right? That is life. Life is beautiful. It's horrific. It's a lot of things, and we have to figure out how we navigate through all that. And when you have the foundation that you have with your family, it 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 makes all that just a little more able to cope with it. Doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it gives us, things to fall back on. And Ryan, it must have been incredible for you and your sister to have that pocket colonel that you can go to and ask for advice at that level. And you guys were at a definite advantage over others that didn't have that resource. So I'm sure you guys used it, and I'm sure he was very happy to make himself available for that. And something that you said makes me very proud of your dad, but also of you. When you talk about the relationship that your dad didn't, put it on you guys. He wasn't the great Zantini, right? If you've ever seen that film, if you haven't, that's I think it's Robert De Niro. Anyhow,
Robert
uh,
Duvall.
Duvall. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there,
Yeah.
but thank you for that. Uh, yeah, I think having a choice in life is always a good thing, and not feeling like you're not going to live up to who your mom or your dad are if you don't follow in their footsteps. That's a lot of weight to carry on folks. I've seen that in other relationships with friends that I have who are very successful, and their kids, who are now in their late 20s and early 30s, struggling with that. And the fact that he showed himself for who he is, and he was there to support you if that was the decision you made. I think that's tremendous. That says a lot about him, but it also says a lot about you and your sister that you saw something that was meaningful. You saw something that was important for who we are as Americans, and you raised your right hand and swore the same oath that we all did to support and defend the Constitution of this amazing country. And thank you for your service. And next time you guys talk to your daughter slash sister, please let her know that we're very thankful for her service as well.
I will do, Scott. I appreciate that. She's on the rifle range right now out in Okinawa, Japan on a Saturday. She'll be there all day long. But you said something that hit the nail on the head in regards to he didn't force us to go a certain path, but he encouraged us to be our own Marine Corps officer. He didn't want me to try to live up to his expectations or how he was as a Marine officer. He wanted me to be my own leader. Same thing with my sister. For her, she was trying to live up to both me and my father. And we both encouraged her to have her own identity and her own reasons for joining. When she told us that she wanted to pursue the 4-year NROTC scholarship, she thought we were going to be head over heels and very supportive. And instead, at first, we were full of questions. Well, why do you want to be a Marine? And she was hitting us with Marine Corps recruiting commercial answers. I want to be the best of the best. I want to travel the world, things like that. And we both knew that that is not your why behind you, the reason why you want to serve your country. So I dug into her a little bit harder than my dad did. He was able to speak to her first, and then he said, I need to go talk to her. We were out in the hot tub at the time. So I went out in the hot tub to talk to her. And again, she's giving me these answers that I'm just not thinking are satisfactory. And I get her down in tears until she finally admits that the real underlying reason why she personally, without my influence or his influence, wanted to be a Marine Corps officer was because she wanted, in her words, to be a badass female lieutenant that even male Marines follow into combat. And I'm a personal trainer. I said, good, we start tomorrow.
And she is that. She is that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big deal. Women have a hard time with things that guys don't even think about, right? Um, and that's a struggle. My wife was an engineer for a number of years, and she worked in the shipbuilding industry. A lot of guys, especially
Mhm.
going into the yard, right, where they're building submarines and aircraft carriers. And my wife was an absolute badass, and she still is. In fact, she's in the other room, so I had to give that plug to her.
Exactly.
But no, that's a great point, Ryan. It's awesome that you dug a little deep and wanted to get to the heart of the matter. That's what good leaders do, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, and before we go here, because I know Drew mentioned he's got another thing to do. Um, is there any last thing, Barry, that you have, or Drew? If not, then you can leave us with your last thoughts before we go.
I
Oh, I'm
was,
sorry. I see Sarah has her hand up. I didn't see that.
oh,
I
sorry, Sarah.
apologize. Let me shift to Sarah real
Oh,
quick.
I know you're out of time here. I just wanted to thank you. I have a ton of thoughts, and I just really appreciate you sharing all this. So I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you so much, and so great to hear from Ryan also. And Scott and Barry, you guys are an awesome team. So this has just been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. And
Oh,
thank you,
thanks,
Scott,
sir.
for setting this up. I think it's really important to have these avenues where folks, for transitioning folks, and not just those who transition, but just all of us to have a community. The tribe is strong, and I think it's really important. And it's been great. If you have anything else for me, you know how to reach me, and happy to talk at any time.
Yeah, much appreciated, Drew.
Yeah, thanks,
Absolutely.
Drew. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
I see Lisa's raised her hand real quick. What you got, Lisa?
Gosh, my mind is swirling too. First of all, sir, thank you so much for your service. I'm still trying to get down the proper salute, um, but thank you. I have a heart for the military. I came out to San Diego as a Navy wife, and I understand the deployments. And yes, you and Scott are both blessed. What I learned from deployments, my husband and I at the time, we did not have a strong marriage. And when you go on deployment, you both kind of grow, right? Because you're in different worlds. And so it can be extremely difficult on a relationship. And I think a lot of relationships don't make it if they don't have that, solid unit. So I'm glad you guys had that. And I appreciate that, to know that there are families that support. I didn't really have a great support like that. But I relate to you on a lot of what you said, sir. Just the things that I go through, and it's like, am I okay? Is this weird? Is this unique to me? My problem is I have all the emotions there, but I can't get it out very eloquently. And you really did that today. And so I just want to say it was an honor to meet you. It was an honor to hear your story, what you had to say. And it's neat to meet your son, and I think your brother and sister, or brother and
Yep.
sister-in-law.
Yep.
So just thank you. Really appreciate you today.
Well, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
awesome,
everybody.
Lisa. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. As always. Well, guys, it has been a remarkable time here with Drew. Thank you for the folks that were live that stayed on with us this whole time. Just as a reminder, we're gonna once we're done with this, we're gonna post it on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on X/Twitter. So did I miss anything, sir? Did I catch all the platforms there? Yeah, cool. And then what we'll also do is we'll link the articles that Drew published, and if Drew has something else that he wants to share, he'll provide that to me, and then we'll put that in the notes section of all those platforms for the recording. Oh, YouTube. I didn't mention YouTube, so there you go. Okay, well, everybody, thank you again for your time today. This was a very meaningful conversation. This is Easter weekend, so it's time to think about what that means, and having a heart for Christ and God. That's important to me too, Drew. Thank you for mentioning your faith again as you did, and I hope everyone has a very blessed and bountiful weekend here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, Scott.